Dilan built his criminal syndicate on cold logic and calculated violence. He owned the city's underworld. He thought he possessed the absolute loyalty of his brilliantly efficient assistant, Chana. Until a random Tuesday night, when he saw her laughing across a candlelit table with another man. It entirely broke him. Dilan Russell didn't believe in indispensable people. In his line of work, everyone had a price, a breaking point, or an expiration date. Men were gears in a machine. When a gear ground down, you stripped it out and hammered a new one into place. That was the philosophy that kept the Russell syndicate fed, feared, and functioning, except when it came to Chana. Chana Knight was the singular exception to his ironclad rule. She was his executive assistant, though the title was a comedic understatement. She was his gatekeeper, his strategist, and the only person in the tri-state area who could tell him no without ending up in the foundation of a new commercial high-rise. She walked into his office on a dismal Thursday morning, carrying a tray that held 1 black espresso, 2 glass bottles of imported sparkling water, and a stack of manila folders that dictated the immediate future of his organization. "The docks are secure," she said, her voice a low, even timbre that immediately lowered Dilan's blood pressure. "But the union rep is getting greedy. He wants an extra 5% on the shipping manifests." "Kill him," Dilan muttered, not looking up from his ledger. "I anticipated you'd say that," Chana replied, setting the espresso exactly 2 inches from his right hand. "Which is why I've already drafted a counterproposal that gives him 2%, but shifts the liability of the customs inspections onto his people. He'll take it. It makes him feel powerful while entirely neutralizing our risk." Dilan stopped writing. He finally looked up. Chana stood before his mahogany desk. She was a heavy woman. She took up space, and she did it with a quiet, undeniable authority. Where other women in his orbit starved themselves into jagged, nervous angles, Chana was utterly solid. She wore a bespoke, wide-leg charcoal suit that flowed effortlessly over thick thighs and a heavy stomach. The silk blouse beneath was a deep burgundy, framing a soft, round face and dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She wasn't delicate. She wasn't frail. She was a goddamn fortress. "You already sent the proposal, didn't you?" Dilan asked. 10 minutes ago, she confirmed. She didn't fidget. She never fidgeted. Her hands, soft and plump, rested loosely by her sides. "What would I do without you, Chana?" It was a rhetorical question, a throwaway line. "You'd likely be indicted by Tuesday and dead by Thursday, sir," she said dryly, turning to leave. "Your 2 o'clock is waiting." "Shall I send him in?" "Give me 5 minutes." She nodded and walked out, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind her. Dilan watched the space she had just occupied. He felt a strange, momentary hollow in his chest when she left the room, a brief drop in cabin pressure. He ignored it. He was a cynical man, entirely detached from the messy liabilities of human emotion. He relied on Chana because she was efficient, because her mind was a steel trap, because she organized the chaotic, violent sprawl of his life into neat, manageable columns. That was all it was. Utility. The day dragged on through a grueling marathon of disputes, payoffs, and strategic threats. Through it all, Chana was the steady drumbeat. She handed him burner phones right before they rang. She provided ledgers just as he needed to reference a number. She seamlessly intercepted an angry capo who had barged into the outer office, neutralizing the man's rage with a calm, flat tone that left the hardened criminal apologizing to her before he even reached Dilan's door. Late that evening, as the city lights blurred through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, Dilan poured himself a scotch. The building was empty. The silence was absolute. Chana was still at her desk in the outer office. the blue light of her monitor reflecting off her glasses. Dilan leaned against the doorframe, nursing his drink. "Go home, Chana. The Empire isn't going to collapse between now and tomorrow morning." She didn't look away from the screen. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "I need to finalize the routing numbers for the Cayman accounts. If I leave it, it'll bother me." "Leave it," he commanded, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of an order. She finally stopped. She pushed her glasses up her nose and turned her chair to face him. The glow of the desk lamp caught the curve of her jaw, the soft swell of her neck. "Are you paying me for my hours, Mr. Russell, or for my peace of mind?" "I pay you to listen to me." "You pay me to keep you out of federal prison," she corrected, shutting down the computer. She stood, smoothing down the front of her jacket. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace. "Good night, Dilan." It was a rare slip. She almost always called him Mr. Russell or Sir. Dilan. The name sounded different coming from her. It sounded grounded, real. "Good night, Chana," he said softly. He watched her walk to the elevator. He watched the heavy, rhythmic sway of her hips, the confident set of her broad shoulders. He stood there long after the elevator doors closed, the ice melting in his glass, entirely unaware that the foundation of his meticulously ordered life was already cracking. Dilan hated high-end restaurants. They were crowded, pretentious, and incredibly difficult to secure. But Senator Hastings liked truffles, and Senator Hastings held the keys to the zoning permits Dilan needed for the waterfront development. Ergo, Dilan was currently sitting in a corner booth at Il Paradiso, enduring a lecture on golf handicaps. "The trick is in the follow-through," Hastings was saying, swirling a $50 glass of Barolo. "You have to commit to the swing, Russell. Most men hesitate. They pull back at the last second." "Fascinating," Dilan lied, scanning the room out of pure habit. Threat assessment was hardwired into his brain. He noted the exits. He noted the heavy-set man by the bar whose jacket bulged slightly at the hip. He noted the waiter hovering too close to the kitchen doors. And then he noted her. His eyes swept past a table near the center of the room, stopped and snapped back violently. It was Chana. For a fraction of a second, Dilan's brain short-circuited. Context collapsed. Chana belonged in his office. Chana belonged behind a desk, flanked by spreadsheets and encrypted phones, wearing sharp suits and an expression of polite indifference. The woman sitting 3 tables away was wearing a deep emerald wrap dress. The fabric clung to the heavy curves of her breasts and stomach, draping elegantly over her hips. Her dark hair, usually pinned in a severe, practical knot, was down, cascading in thick waves over her bare shoulders. She wore dark red lipstick. She was breathtaking. The realization hit Dilan like a physical blow to the sternum, but it wasn't her appearance that made his blood run suddenly, terrifyingly cold. It was the man sitting across from her. He was incredibly ordinary. Sandy hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a tweed jacket that looked soft and worn, a civilian, a nobody. And Chana was smiling at him. It wasn't her professional, polite smile, the one she used to appease angry lieutenants or deflect nosy politicians. It was a wide, genuine, unrestrained laugh. Her eyes crinkled. She threw her head back, exposing the long column of her throat. Dilan stopped breathing. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking silverware, the low hum of conversation, the pretentious jazz playing over the speakers, faded into a high-pitched ring. "Are you listening to me, Russell?" Hastings asked, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. Dilan didn't answer. He couldn't tear his eyes away. The sandy-haired man leaned forward. He said something low. Chana's smile softened into something warm and intimate. She reached across the white linen tablecloth. Dilan felt a sudden, violent spike of adrenaline. Don't touch him. The thought wasn't a request. It was a furious, irrational demand. But she did. Chana's soft, plump hand rested over the man's knuckles. The man turned his hand over and linked his fingers with hers. He brushed his thumb across her skin. A sharp, audible crack snapped Dilan out of his tunnel vision. Senator Hastings jumped, spilling wine on his tie. Dilan looked down. The heavy crystal tumbler he had been holding was shattered. Amber scotch and blood pooled on the table. He had squeezed the glass until it broke. "Jesus Christ, Dilan," Hastings hissed, dabbing at his suit. "My apologies, Senator," Dilan said. His voice was entirely devoid of inflection. He sounded like a machine. He grabbed a cloth napkin and wrapped it tightly around his bleeding palm, not feeling the sting of the glass shards embedded in his skin. He didn't look at the blood. He looked back at the table. Chana hadn't noticed. She was trapped in her own world, a world that Dilan had no part of, a world where she drank wine and laughed and held hands with a man who probably worried about mortgage rates and lawn care. A dark, venomous possessiveness uncoiled in Dilan's gut. It was an ugly, monstrous thing. He had spent his entire life controlling his environment, eradicating variables, owning everything he touched. He realized in that suffocating moment that he had fundamentally misunderstood his relationship with Chana. He didn't just rely on her. He didn't just need her efficiency. He needed her. Exclusively. Entirely. He watched the man refill Chana's wine glass. He watched the way the man looked at her, with clear, unhidden admiration. He saw the way the man's eyes lingered on the soft, heavy slope of her cleavage, on the fullness of her lips. Dilan wanted to stand up, walk over to the table, and bury a steak knife in the man's neck. The urge was so sudden and so violently real that Dilan had to physically grip the edge of the table with his good hand to keep himself seated. "Russell, you need a doctor," Hastings said, looking nervously at the blood soaking through the white napkin. "This meeting is over. We can discuss the permits next week." "The meeting is over," Dilan agreed softly. He stood up. He threw a stack of $100 bills onto the table, enough to cover the meal, the broken glass, and the dry cleaning. He didn't walk toward the exit. He walked straight toward the center of the room. Every logical instinct screamed at him to leave, to handle this later, to process the chaotic warfare happening in his own head. But logic had evacuated the premises the second that ordinary, sandy-haired man had touched Chana's hand. Dilan stopped directly beside their table. Chana looked up. The warm, soft expression on her face vanished, instantly replaced by the cool, guarded mask of his executive assistant. The transition was flawless, and it made Dilan want to tear the room apart. "Mr. Russell," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of genuine shock in her dark eyes. She quickly pulled her hand away from the man's. "Chana," Dilan replied, his voice a low, gravelly purr. He deliberately ignored the man sitting across from her. His dark, predatory gaze was locked entirely on her. He took in the emerald dress, the red lipstick, the slight flush on her cheeks. "You look different." "I'm off the clock, sir," she said cleanly. She glanced at his hand, wrapped in the bloody napkin. Her professional instincts flared. "You're bleeding. What happened?" "A minor miscalculation," Dilan said, his eyes finally sliding over to the man. Up close, the civilian looked even more pathetic. He was looking at Dilan with polite confusion, entirely unaware that he was sitting 2 feet away from the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard. "I don't believe we've met," Dilan said. The words were civil. The tone was an executioner's block. "Oh," Chana said, clearing her throat. "Mr. Russell, this is Sawyer Ward. Sawyer, This is my boss, Dilan Russell." Sawyer smiled amiably and stood up, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Russell. Chana has told me so much about the firm." Dilan looked at Sawyer's extended hand. He did not take it. He let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. He let it drag until the air turned thick and suffocating, until Sawyer's smile faltered, and he awkwardly lowered his hand. "Has she?" Dilan finally murmured. He shifted his gaze back to Chana. "Enjoy your evening, Chana. We have a very busy morning tomorrow. Don't be late." He didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked out of the restaurant, ignoring the blood dripping onto the Italian marble floor. He pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the damp, freezing night air. His black SUV was waiting at the curb. His driver, seeing the blood, immediately reached for the door handle. "Drive around the block," Dilan barked. "And wait." He stood in the shadows across the street. His hand throbbed. His chest ached with a tight, unfamiliar pressure. He watched the entrance of Il Paradiso for 45 minutes. When Chana finally emerged, Sawyer was beside her. He helped her into her wool coat. He lingered near her. They stood under the awning, and then Sawyer leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, brief kiss on the lips. Chana smiled. Dilan stood in the freezing shadows, watching the only anchor he had in the world drift away with someone else. He pulled his ringing burner phone out of his pocket. It was his second in command. He answered it, his eyes never leaving Sawyer's back, as the man walked Chana to a waiting cab. "What is it?" Dilan answered, his voice dead. "We got a problem at the warehouse, boss. Need you to make a call." "Handle it," Dilan said. "And I need a background check. Deep dive. Financials, family, routines, everything. I want it on my desk by 6 a.m. "Who's the target, boss?" Dilan watched the cab pull away, taking Chana with it. The cynical, untouchable Mafia boss was gone, replaced by something deeply obsessive and entirely unhinged. "Sawyer Ward," Dilan whispered into the dark. "Find out everything about him. Before I kill him." Sunlight offered no absolution in the Russell Syndicate. It merely illuminated the dust. Dilan sat in his office, perfectly still, watching the morning traffic crawl over the bridge. His right hand was tightly bandaged. His desk, normally a curated expanse of absolute order, was buried under 70 pages of a private investigator's dossier. Sawyer Ward, 34 years old, junior accountant at a mid-level logistics firm. Credit score of 720. He drove a 4-year-old sedan, attended a suburban gym twice a week, and possessed an entirely unremarkable web browsing history. He was bland. He was safe. He was a living, breathing, beige wall. Dilan hated him with a purity that terrified him. At exactly 7 o'clock, the heavy oak door opened. Chana walked in. She carried the same silver tray, the same black espresso, the same glass bottles of water. She wore a deep plum suit today, the structured jacket hugging the broad, heavy slope of her shoulders and pulling taut across her thick waist. She looked formidable. She looked like gravity. "Good morning, Mr. Russell," she said. Her voice was an absolute void. No warmth, no edge, just a professional flat line. "Is it?" Dilan asked. He didn't touch the coffee. Chana set the tray down. She didn't ask about his bandaged hand. She didn't mention the restaurant. She simply pulled a tablet from under her arm. The longshoremen agreed to the new terms. "We have a sit-down with the Calabrese family at noon. I've pre-approved the security detail." "Cancel the Calabrese meeting." She paused, her finger hovering over the screen. "Sir, they've been waiting 3 weeks for this sit-down. Delaying again shows disrespect." "I said cancel it." Dilan stood up. He walked around the desk. He didn't stop until he was standing a foot away from her. Chana didn't back up. She never shrank from him. She simply looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. Up close, he could smell her perfume, something earthy, like cedar and vanilla. It made his pulse thrash against his jaw. "Do you know what he makes in a year, Chana?" Dilan asked softly. Chana went utterly still. The professional mask didn't slip, but it froze. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sawyer Ward," Dilan murmured, letting the civilian's name roll off his tongue like spoiled meat. He reached back, grabbed the thick manila folder off his desk, and dropped it onto the silver tray next to his coffee. It hit the metal with a heavy, definitive thud. "He makes $84,000 a year. He has $12,000 in a savings account. He has a mild allergy to shellfish. He bought his mother a cheap cubic zirconia necklace for Christmas last year." Chana stared at the folder. She didn't reach for it. When she finally looked back up at Dilan, the coldness in her eyes was absolute. It was a freezing, terrifying absolute. "You ran a background check on my date." It wasn't a question. "I run background checks on anyone who gets within 10 feet of my inner circle," Dilan lied effortlessly. Or perhaps it wasn't a lie. He didn't know anymore. "You are my chief of staff. You hold the keys to this entire kingdom. Did you really think I would let some mediocre pencil pusher hold your hand without knowing exactly who he is?" "He is a civilian," Chana said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. "He has nothing to do with this business. He has nothing to do with you. He touched you." The words bypassed Dilan's brain and clawed their way out of his throat. He sounded raw. He sounded pathetic. He didn't care. "I am a grown woman, Dilan," Chana said. It was the second time she had used his first name in 2 days. This time it wasn't a comfort. It was a warning. "I am allowed to have dinner. I am allowed to be touched. By whomever I choose." "Why him?" Dilan demanded, closing the distance between them until he could feel the heat radiating off her skin. "He can't protect you. He can't give you anything. He looked at you like you were a novelty." "He looked at me," Chana corrected sharply, "like I was a woman, not a machine, not a human shield, not a piece of high-functioning office furniture." She stepped to the side, breaking his physical trap, and walked over to his desk. She pulled a blank piece of heavy, monogrammed stationery from his drawer. She picked up his silver fountain pen. She wrote 3 lines, signed her name, and left it dead center on the leather blotter. "What is that?" Dilan asked, a sudden cold panic seizing his chest. 2 weeks' notice," Chana said calmly. "Effective immediately. I am using my accumulated vacation time for the remainder of those 2 weeks." Dilan stared at the paper. The world tilted violently on its axis. "You can't quit." "I just did." "Because of a dossier? Because of some nobody?" Dilan's voice rose, the cynical control finally shattering. "I can give you anything. Name your price, Chana. Double your salary. A piece of the waterfront development. Whatever you want." "I want boundaries," she said softly, walking toward the door. "And you don't know how to build those. You only know how to tear them down." She opened the door. "If you walk out that door, Chana," Dilan warned, his voice a lethal, desperate threat, "I will ensure Sawyer Ward never finds work in this city again." Chana stopped. She didn't turn around. Her broad back was stiff. "If you touch one hair on his head, Dilan, or sabotage one aspect of his boring, mediocre life, I will take the encrypted ledgers I memorized 3 years ago and walk straight into the FBI field office." Dilan couldn't breathe. She wasn't bluffing. She was the only person in the world who could destroy him, and she was entirely willing to do it for a man she had known for 3 weeks. She walked out. The door clicked shut. The drop in cabin pressure was permanent. 72 hours. That was how long the Russell Syndicate survived before it began to cannibalize itself. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing hemorrhage. Shipments were delayed because nobody had the secondary clearance codes. The capos started bickering over territories because Dilan didn't have the patience to moderate their fragile egos. He broke a lieutenant's jaw on Friday morning over a minor scheduling error. By Saturday night, the atmosphere in the penthouse was toxic, suffocating, and dripping with paranoia. Dilan sat in the dark. He hadn't changed his clothes in 2 days. He stared at the empty desk in the outer office. He didn't miss her efficiency. He didn't miss her organizational skills. He missed the heavy, grounding weight of her presence. He missed the way she occupied space, entirely unashamed and unbothered by a world that demanded women be small and silent. He missed the sharp, dark intelligence in her eyes. He realized, with the cynical clarity of a man staring down his own execution, that he was entirely in love with her. It wasn't a soft, romantic love. It was a violent, consuming necessity. She was his gravity. Without her, he was just a man floating in a dark, bloody void. At 11 p.m. he grabbed his keys. Chana lived in a pre-war brownstone in Brooklyn. It wasn't a fortress. It was a home. Dilan bypassed the broken front lock, walked up 3 flights of stairs, and stood outside door 3B. He didn't kick it in. He didn't pick the lock. He raised his unbandaged hand and knocked. It took 2 minutes. The deadbolt slid back. The door opened a few inches, stopped by a chain. Chana peered through the gap. She wore grey sweatpants and an oversized faded band t-shirt. Her hair was piled in a messy, chaotic bun. Her face was bare, soft, and exhausted. She looked at the bloodshot rings around Dilan's eyes, the wrinkled suit, the desperate slump of his shoulders. She didn't look scared. She looked profoundly annoyed. "Are you going to shoot me, Dilan, or just stand in my hallway, bleeding on my welcome mat?" she asked. "My hand stopped bleeding 2 days ago," he rasped. "I was speaking metaphorically." She sighed, a heavy, tired sound. She unlatched the chain and pulled the door open. "Come in." The apartment smelled like garlic, butter, and old paper. Books were stacked haphazardly on the coffee table. A thick, knitted throw blanket was draped over a worn velvet sofa. It was cluttered and warm. It was her. Dilan stepped inside. He suddenly felt entirely out of his depth. He was a predator in a sanctuary. He didn't know where to put his hands. "Did you come to threaten Sawyer again?" she asked, walking into the small kitchenette to turn off a kettle. "I haven't thought about Sawyer Ward in 48 hours, Dilan said. It was the truest thing he had said all week. "Then why are you here?" Dilan stood in the center of her living room. He looked at her. He looked at the thick, beautiful curve of her hips in the sweatpants, the heavy, soft swell of her stomach beneath the t-shirt. He wanted to bury his face against her neck and never look at the outside world again. "The business is falling apart," he started, his voice rough. "Hire another assistant. The temp agency has dozens." "I don't want another assistant." Dilan stepped closer. She turned around, leaning her lower back against the kitchen counter, watching him approach. She didn't retreat. "I don't want anyone else in my office. I don't want anyone else looking at me. I don't want anyone else handling my life." He stopped inches from her. He reached out, his hand hovering over her hip, terrified to touch her without permission. "You crossed a line, Dilan," Chana said firmly, though her breathing hitched slightly as he stood so close. "You treat people like property. I am not a shipping container. You don't own me." "I know," he whispered. He finally closed the distance. He placed his hands on her waist. She was so solid. so incredibly real. I don't own you, Chana. It's the other way around. You own me. She stared up at him, her dark eyes searching his face for the lie, for the manipulation. She found nothing but raw, bleeding honesty. He looked at you in that restaurant, Dilan continued, his voice thick with a dark, desperate possession. And I wanted to tear the building down. Not because you're my employee, because I have spent 5 years watching you rule my entire world, and I realized I never told you that it was yours. Chana swallowed hard. Her hand slowly came up, resting flat against his chest. She could feel the frantic, heavy pounding of his heart beneath his ruined suit jacket. You are a dangerous, selfish man, she whispered. I am, he agreed instantly. You will try to control everything I do. I will try, he admitted, his thumb stroking the soft, thick flesh of her waist. And you will stop me. Because you are the only person on earth stronger than I am. Chana looked at him for a long, silent moment. The power dynamic in the room, in their entire relationship, permanently shifted. The Mafia boss wasn't taking what he wanted. He was surrendering unconditionally. Sawyer is boring, Chana finally said, her voice dropping to a soft murmur. I know. And his kisses are polite. Dilan's jaw clenched. Mine won't be. Chana's hands slid up from his chest, her thick, soft arms wrapping around his neck. She pulled him down. Show me. Dilan crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't polite. It was a desperate, hungry collision. He wrapped his arms entirely around her heavy, beautiful body, pulling her flush against him, finally anchoring himself to the only real thing in his dark, violent world. He kissed her until the cynical armor shattered completely, leaving only the man and the fortress who held him together. Did this dark, slow-burn, mafia romance steal your breath? If you loved watching the terrifying, cynical Dilan Russell surrender completely to the brilliant and beautiful Chana, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow dark romance readers and subscribe to the channel for more gripping, emotional, and intensely human storytelling. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment between these two? See you in the next video.